Hi, ladies. Let me just tell y'all, it's been a long day. Okay, so y'all gonna see me in all my madness today. From work with kids to trick or treating with kids to here I am with y'all. So, how's everybody doing? How's your Monday?
Pretty
Coming off,
good.
yeah,
You said what?
coming off the weekend is always rough.
Oh, absolutely. Yes, yes, yes. Everybody in the chat, hey, you guys. All right, so I guess we can introduce our panelists. We have Mistaken,
Hey.
Enos,
Hi, everyone.
and Javara.
Yes, ma'am.
I said
Hello.
that. Thank you guys for being here with us today. It's a lot going on in these YouTube streets. I'm just gonna keep my ladylike composure tonight and just stick with what we're talking about and don't let anything distract me.
Is something on your mind? It sounds like.
Oh, but it's almost like is it a safe place to really speak how you feel? So you just keep it to yourself. It's supposed to be a conversation between adult people, and then it just gets taken out of proportion. People don't want to know the truth. That's all it is. They don't want to know.
Facts.
They don't want to know. So you just keep it to yourself, and you just talk behind people's back. Like, it's the safest place. All right, y'all. That's just me venting. I apologize. So we're gonna start out with a video. So let me play the video because a lot of what we're talking about tonight, which is gonna be a short tonight, is about this video. So let's play.
So many black men in the comment section saying, oh, you have all these high demands, but what do you bring to the table? Good question. Studies have shown that black women are the highest paid and the most educated. I myself graduated with my associate's degree at 18 and graduated from college with my bachelor's at 20 with a degree in communication sciences with an emphasis in speech and language pathology. I live on my own, have my own car, make about $70,000 a year, and don't have any kids. So I'll never ask for what I can't offer. And as far as what I'm bringing to the table, I bring me, and you can't sit with it.
First off, studies don't reveal any bullshit about black women being the most educated and the most paid. The average black woman in America makes about $40K, and black women hold the least amount of PhDs, which is actually the metric that determines the most educated. And even if they did, it wouldn't matter because men don't care about incomes or degrees unless it's in how to be a wife. Next, the female cliche, I am the table. The table manufactured from the strong and independent women's warehouse from the finest delusions. Now, if she said black women hold the highest degrees in difficulty, undesirability, masculinity, obesity, and single motherhood rates, that would have been accurate.
Okay, y'all. What are your thoughts? It's a lot to unpack there.
Very much so.
So what are you guys' thoughts on that video? It was so much that he said. So what are your thoughts on that?
I'm trying not to jump in. Inez, you go ahead because I see you about to say.
Yeah, I'll jump in. I think so. Shane Monet, I think, like you said, he had a lot to say, and so there's a lot to unpack. I think the only point that he made that I agreed with was that men don't care about a woman's level of education. Unless they're the type of man, or their income, right? Unless they're the type of man who's interested in a 50-50 partnership, it typically isn't of interest to most men. However, I think the idea that women are the table comes from the strong, independent woman. It seems to be super disingenuous. Like, we're going to pretend like wars weren't waged over women, that, the trophy wife trope hasn't been a huge marker to male success. The value of what a woman represents is not super important to society. Like, it just seems disingenuous to end on that note, right? That this is an independent woman thing, and that, women are like essentially partners to show up at the table with, as opposed to what womanhood represents in society.
Anybody else?
I was gonna say again that was a whole a lot to unpack. But one of the things that I'm noticing a pattern of is this huge pushback against, I'm going to just say Black women, because that's typically what we're talking about, from Black men in regards to this, I don't know what it is, this desire to just want to put Black women in their place. Like, and that's kind of what I hear is on the women's side, this pushback to show how great we are, like in terms of how to prove ourselves, how we show up, like, oh, we're not what you think. We're the most educated. We're making a lot of money. We're doing all of these things. So it's that pushback to kind of prove I'm worthy, I'm good enough. And then I think on the men's end, that their pushback is with the, no, you're not as great as you think you are. You know what I mean? And so that's kind of like the dialogue that I kind of see from that video, is that from the woman's perspective, the need to prove herself, like, from hearing a lot of the rhetoric about how Black women ain't ish, you know what I mean? To say, I am, these are the things that I accomplish. These are the things that I bring to the table. But then from the male perspective of saying, yes, you bring in all of these things to the table, which means nothing to me. And so I don't know how to kind of process that, in the sense of it means nothing to me in relation to all of the things that you've accomplished, which are great, means absolutely nothing, which to me is kind of like, oh, wow. Or the other aspect of it as, this means nothing to me because I'm looking for something else outside of what it is you're providing. So I don't know, but it's a lot that I can unpack what he said, but I'm gonna let somebody else. Put all your eggs in one basket, and then you find out. Oh, sorry.
What you listening to?
I hit something on my phone, and then it started going off. My hand swiped it, because I talk with my hands.
But whatever she said, don't put all your eggs in one basket, especially when they're out here talking like that. But I'll say this. First and foremost, Black women be the most desired and undesirable. Like, you just go where you celebrate it, period. Like, somebody wants somebody somewhere. And if that's the attitude that he has towards you, then you just go where the attitude is not, right? So leave him where he is. But aside from that, a lot of men nowadays are saying, like, we don't care if a woman's educated or what she brings to the table. But on the flip side, they'll be like, they don't want to pay all the bills either. So it does matter, right, to some. And then also, there's so much that he said. Also, if a woman does not have something, then she's going to be looked at as a bum, or, y'all not going to pick women up off the street and put her in position to work for a business that a lot of guys don't have, who have the mentality, So this is, go where you celebrate. I don't even really have a thought on that, because I don't think much about people who don't think highly of me or us, so.
Well, the other thing too that I don't like is this narrative that's being put. I think men look at when women are saying these are the things that I do as a situation of engagement, like to fight. You know what I'm saying? Which I think that to some degree, don't get me wrong, I do think some women weaponize, their education and how much money they make. I've definitely have come across that situation, like feeling like, oh, because I make this and you can't tell me, not, that kind of stuff. So I have come across that. But like, I don't like a lot of times the narrative that's being pushed or these stats that are being thrown out without people necessarily doing like the research. So the part that he was saying, he was correct in saying the fact that Black women are not earning, the highest earners. We're not. So he was definitely correct in that. But in terms of him saying that the doctoral level degree is the metric that is being used in terms of education, and women, Black women may have the least amount. But if we want to extrapolate that data, they are pursuing higher degrees more so than men, period. Black men, when we're pulling out Black stats, like in general, overall, just across the board, women are obtaining degrees at a higher rate than men. And this is across all ethnicities. But if we look at Blacks in general, and compare to like what women are doing, like Black males, I kind of looked this information up. It overall is 9.2% of Black people that are getting doctoral degrees. But when we look at Black males, they're at 7.1%. Black females are at 10.9%. So what she's saying is accurate in that regard. You know what I mean? And so when we are listening to these stats and somebody's just throwing them out, and if it's in line with what you think, you're automatically going to go for it. And so I just think that we do need to do a better job of making sure that when we're quoting stats, that we're understanding them, for one, and then kind of giving that information to people for them to look up on their own if they're interested in it, because I pulled that from the National Center of Education Statistics. So it was just an easy search to just kind of confirm whether what he was saying was true or not. And even seeing what she was saying was true or not. But I don't know, that just kind of bothers me. Like, that's my background is in education. So a lot of times when I'm hearing these things, I'm always going to go look it up. And I think a lot of times, we are throwing these stats to just kind of fit a narrative that we want other people to think, and I just didn't like that.
I'm mistaken. I think you said something interesting about this humbling process that happens a lot over social media. And as you're kind of breaking down the stats, I'm now curious, because I think we all know the school to prison pipeline system. We all know young Black men, the challenges and struggles that they face, the lack of support in their education. And so the numbers just make sense that women have more of these opportunities. There's more grants, there's more encouragement, with single mothers empowering their daughters. There's this push, right? And even with people who are single mothers, like there's this push to provide for their children, right? Is it, and like, this isn't like about it being a feminist conversation, but just like a real conversation. Is it like a toe-to-toe out of lack? Is it like a jealousy thing, a lack of opportunity thing, just like a lack mindset of, I don't have this, and so it doesn't mean anything because you have it?
I would agree with that, because what I find is, Mistaken and I, we go to the streets and we don't mind asking people that we know who would fit the category of people would consider them the desired guy, and most of the guys who we met who are educated want a woman who is educated. Not one stated that they did not want a woman. We've heard Trill say it. We've heard the men on his panel who have stated they want educated women. So I agree with what you're saying. It just depends on, and it's not even that. What I say, people like minds. Put it that way. So if you're into education, let's take away the desire. If you are into education, you more than likely want a spouse who is also into education. If it doesn't matter to you, then you may want a spouse who it doesn't matter to. It's just about compatibility. Everybody is not for you. this woman just was not for him. And I do agree that she shouldn't, you shouldn't boast about it, because he's right. That's not something you come on a dinner table and you're like, well, I have this, and this. A guy's looking like, well, that's not going to put you to the forefront of being like, ooh, she's got all of this, you know? So I agree that men totally date different than women do. They don't look for that when you're going on a date initially, but it certainly does not hurt to be an educated woman if you're dealing with an educated man. I just wouldn't put it at the top of the list like something I'm a boast about on the first date, you know, because I don't think that it matters to them as much as it matters, just not as a, what's the word? It's not
like a priority or
a priority. It shouldn't be like the first thing. Like it's nothing that's going to put you at the front of the line if that's what you're trying to do over another person. You know, there are other things that they look for first. They're into beauty first and everything else after that. That's just universal. But one of the things that stood out to me that I noticed in this particular video, because one of the guys was like, well, I see nothing wrong. It was like he came back after her. But the difference was she was saying, what does she bring to the table? And while you may not like what she brings to the table, she never once degraded a Black man.
Mm-hmm.
She never once called him out of his name. She just stated what she brought to the table. But when he came back with his rebuttal, he decided it was an opportunity to try to put, like Mistaken said, put Black women in their place. Oh, you ain't pretty much, so to speak. And that's the difference in arguments. Whenever you have to belittle somebody in the middle of your argument, that means you have not won. You that to me is automatic, just an issue for me. But that's just.
Do you think it that the whole kind of like what you were saying, piggybacking off of what you were saying, Inez, about that humbling process? Do you think that the education thing and the financial thing typically said, like men that say it doesn't matter to them, or your degrees don't matter, is if they're unequal?
Boost Mobile, call them up.
It's okay. I think I know where she's
And I'm
going with that.
providing you the service that you need. Go ahead.
That comes from, like, if I know as a man I'm coming to the table and you may have a degree and I don't, that degree is going to mean less to me because I don't have? Or is it that regardless across the board, if the man has education or not, that they don't consider the fact that she's educated as any part of something that's extra that she's bringing to the table?
No, I think that's a great question. I think when I hear a lot of these topics and like this put down of Black women in general, whether it's financial or education, skin tone, body shape, whatever, I hear a lot of like internalized misogynoir, like this combination of racism and misogyny kind of mixed in together, this constant put down of taking away Black women in terms of their femininity, in terms of what they bring to the table, in terms of how they show it. It's this constant put down from larger society that then shows up in Black men as well, right? So I think regardless of the topic, you're going to hear somebody in the manosphere talking something about Black women. And it's unfortunate that so many people take what greater society says and take that on in and of themselves and then project it onto the people at the bottom of the totem pole society-wise, right? It sounds really bitter, if I'm going to speak plainly. It sounds like a grasp to maintain control, that, you know, if I can put you down and you still come back to me, then like I have a certain level of hierarchy in this relationship. It's a little weird. It's a little weird.
I think a lot of men who kind of speak like that for sure are just insecure in some aspect of their life, whether it's financial or just them being the man who they think they're supposed to be, or mentally, spiritually, something is missing in there. And when a woman kind of comes and is boastful and just saying all the things that she does and has, and it punches them in that wherever the insecurity is in him. And so to make, like you said, to make himself feel better, he'll say things to kind of try to put her down or put her back into her place. And I think even the conversation of what you bring to the table is a conversation, like, men typically pursue women, right? So it's like, first of all, sir, you have to have your table and then know what you're looking for to put on your table. Like, shouldn't ask somebody what they're providing. You are looking to finish putting the places, on your table. So if you don't even know what you're looking for, to ask her what she provides is like, what are you doing? Why are you even talking to her if you didn't feel like she filled those spots in that you were looking to fill? So I don't know. This conversation is.
So do you think that men, okay, when they, and I know that some women get upset even when a man be like, so what do you bring to the table? I've known some women that are just like, oh, when I hear that, I just want to cringe. But in taking it for what it is that I guess they're asking, and you, like in that situation, she's explaining, this is what I bring to the table. So do you think that men are genuine when they're asking what you're bringing to the table? Or do you already think that they have an agenda of what it is they're looking for, and instead of asking that, they don't ask that directly?
I think that let me just say this before you even get into that. If I go on a date with her, it's the way the approach is very unattractive. If I were a dude, I wouldn't have gotten excited about that either. Okay, I think it's about just being humble. Just chill. It'll come out that you have a degree. It'll come out that you have all of these things. I think that there's a cockiness that kind of comes with it, a little ego maybe that comes with it, that may be a little turn off. So if she were more ladylike, and then it comes up like, oh, where have you studied? Oh, I've studied in the, men aren't really turned on by, oh yeah, and I got this, and I got that, and I got this and that and that. They're more like, if it comes up in conversation, you just bring it out. Kind of people, I mean, am I right?
Well, no, I agree with you. I think sometimes when you're having a conversation, just a natural conversation, certain things come up. But when you are presented with a question such as, what do you bring to the table? To me, that automatically feels like an interview, right? Like at a job. And so,
right. So I think they want to say
interview question, you're going to bring up all of your accomplishments. So if it's something else that they're looking for, then the approach to asking for that needs to be the question, not what do you bring to the table, because that's an interview question. So I'm gonna say, okay, I got my degree from such and such, I own, 2 properties.
But that doesn't sound ladylike.
So okay, so I hear
let's role play.
Question the right way.
Role play. Listen, so what they're looking for. If you go on a date and a guy is like, well, what do you bring to it? He comes out because he's a man. He's like, what do you bring to the table? In his manly thing, you have to be a lady, and you get around to it, and you say all of these great things like the domestic, and then you throw it in. Like, I'm kind of smart too, and then you throw it in there in a sexy kind of way.
But okay, so I hear you. On a date, 100%. Be ladylike, bask in the feminine energy, like really just live in it. However, that video did not come from a date. This was not somebody who recorded her on a date and the conversation was, broadcasted. I'm assuming because it was a clip that there was a little bit more to that. There was some context that we're missing to why she brought these things up, right? This was a conversation piece for the internet and not a vetting protocol on an intimate date. I will say this. I think, in my personal opinion, and I'm treading some dangerous water saying this on the internet, I think men who ask that question have no sense of discernment. if I have to list off my qualifications that I think are fitting of a woman being a partner, I think you don't know how to observe. I think you need somebody to lay things out for you. You don't understand how to observe a woman, how to pay attention, how to learn these things, because educated women typically have a certain vernacular. They typically are comfortable in certain spaces. They typically are able to, give you reference points or certain things that indicate that she has an education. Or she'll reference things like a sorority or a club that she was in at school or where she met certain girlfriends. If you can't pick up on the fact that she has some level of education without making her state it, or that she has domestic skills without making her state it, you're asking this question out of laziness. And to me, I think that's really unattractive.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think, as mistaken, like your question was, is it like something they're kind of doing to just really make conversation and not really care about what she brings to the table? I think I've never been asked that, and I don't know how I would respond if so, because like I said, it's like something that you pick out when you're in conversation with somebody. You just kind of pick up on her mannerisms and the things you like about her or dislike. It's not something that you really have to just lay out. Like, okay, like I said, I do this, this, and that, and it's just, and it's a matter of knowing what you're looking for in somebody. What like, we might go on a date with a guy, right? And first, like I always say, I feel like men approach women more. And usually if you're on a date with them, it's because he asked you to be here. So of course, you be flirty and nice and sweet, but I feel like it's about what does your table look like, sir? Because you might have a buffet style table, you might have a 2-seater. I don't know, a high top, low table. So it's really, for me, I feel, for the man to kind of present a little bit of the table that he has, and you decide if you fit into that, or he decides if you have qualities that kind of match what goes along with his setting. I just think courting is this conversation is just really, it's weird. It's strange, right? I don't get it. I don't know why the table conversation even comes up. Like she said, if you have discernment, you tell what and who you're dealing with. And if you can't, then probably spend more time with yourself and figure out, where your vibe is.
It's so weird because I've never been on a date before. Well, I don't go on many dates, but on the few that I've gone on, I've never been asked, what do I bring to the table?
Yeah, never.
But she looks young though.
I've been hearing that question in the YouTube street, should I say?
Yeah,
and I like, I've clearly been out of the dating market for forever. So I really don't know what it's like at this stage in age, being in the dating market. But for me, I just personally think that when you're asking such a broad question like, what do you bring to the table? To me, that's a setup. And I don't mean set up in a bad way, but it's a setup to respond with the things that I've accomplished, right? I mean, that's the way I would personally look at it. What do you bring to the table? So if a man is really getting at something other than my accomplishments, if he's talking more so those intangibles, if that's what he's looking for, like, do you want a family? Do like those kind of things? Like, do you know how to cook? Do you know?
Ask those questions.
Right. Then I think he needs to be more direct in regards to that. Like, I'm going to ask, well, what is it that you're looking for in a mate? To me, that's a better question to get towards the answer that he's looking for, that doesn't necessarily have anything to do with, education or how much money I'm bringing to the table.
I agree. I think asking that question is, I've never been asked that question either. However, I do have girlfriends that have been asked that question, and it feels like a setup, right? It feels like it's not about what do you bring to the table, but it's more so of, okay, what can I put you down about, right? Like we were talking about that humbling process before. I've never heard anyone recount being asked that question where it came from a place of curiosity, of genuinely just trying to figure that person out. It was always, oh, you have an education, I don't care about that. You can cook, so can I. That's not important. Like it's almost like crossing off the things that they don't deem valuable, as opposed to getting to know whether or not this person fits in their life, which I think is probably why the question is so off-putting to so many women, that it's very disingenuous.
Mhm.
There was a question in the chat, because we're just like, free flowing tonight. And what wasn't a question, it was a statement. And I'm sorry, Frank, can I just borrow your question, your statement real fast and put it up here? It says your education and profession means nothing. And I would agree to an extent. To some people, it does not. But I think that people have to understand that, education, especially when it comes to higher education, was not for everybody. Back in the day, I'm a classical girl. Like, I like classic movies. I like classic, documentaries of the past. And what I've learned is that, if you want, your parents sent you off, back in the day, to a university if you wanted to marry a wealthy man. They wanted you to be well-versed. So your education wasn't necessarily used for the workplace. It was used to raise his children, because he wanted a woman who was well-versed raising his children. Also, it just showed that you were in a different, I think somebody else may have made a comment about you were in a different socioeconomic class. It just put you in a different class. He wanted to make sure you were of the same class as him, because he dare not, and this is back in the past, date down. He wanted to make sure you were of a certain type of substance. So fast forward to today, while we don't put that much emphasis into it, there are some people absolutely that want you, if he's the CEO of a company, he wants to make sure that you are well versed. So when you're walking around with the other wives, you fit in, because his job depends on it. You have to work the room as well, maybe in a ladylike fashion, but you just can't be some chick who doesn't know anything walking around a room full of women who are well versed, or a room, the wives club, so to speak, and you just don't know anything. So I like I said, I'm kind of rambling right now, so I'm gonna stop. But I do think that you're right. It doesn't matter to some, but it does matter to a few.
So I think nothing is a really strong word, right? And Shan Monet, I love that you brought up like where that concept kind of came from of women being educated and why that was important. But let's take it into a different context for today. Her being educated means if she becomes your wife, her counsel is coming from a place with certain depth to it, right? And not to say people who don't have education can't go through intellect, but there's a greater acceptance of her level of knowledge if she's educated. The other thing is that it does is that it sets her up that if you choose to have children together, or you're coming in with children, that there's a certain level of supplementing of education that can happen. Even her profession, there are certain contacts she can have to guide those children, or whenever she's helping them make decisions on where they want to go. Like, let's not pretend that education is totally meaningless. Like, I think it's silly, right? Like, it means nothing. Obviously, it means something. Otherwise, people would not seek to have it, right? It's not just a status symbol. There are doors that it opens. There are opportunities that it creates. Can you do that without? Absolutely. But does it give you more opportunity? Let's not pretend that it doesn't.
And the more we talk about this, right, I'm thinking, as you mentioned, like the movies and education, I think really now that makes sense, because social media, right, has given people access to people they wouldn't normally have access to. So for a guy who says her education and money or profession, that means nothing, that's for a guy who that means nothing too, right? Because in the real world, if there's no social media, the people that you're running into people in your circle, in your space, in your profession, in that field where you dibble and dabble. So now it's like, okay, you meet this girl and she's like excited about or boastful about her degree and the money she makes, and to a guy who just ran into her from social media, it doesn't mean something. But where she is, the school she went to, you know, that same guy at Harvard who got that degree, like, wow, you did it too. You know, they're attracted to that. So really, people really mix with people they really ain't got no business mixing with. What I'm starting to realize.
I didn't want to say it. But I mean, I agree with that. I do agree with that. It's just, I agree with that. Let me just shut up. But I it's so funny that you said that, because I thought about that before we got online. But I was like, but I don't want to say that, because you try to tiptoe. Because the whole point, I never want to, when we talk on these, it's never to belittle anybody. It's never to, and I don't ever want anybody to come on the show and walk away like feeling salty because something was said. You know what I'm saying? But I agree with that statement.
I'm sorry. I'm I can say feel salty, but this is the thing. Like, if we're talking about having honest conversations, like some of the things that he said, like, Black women in attitudes and them being, being obese and all of that. To be honest, he's absolutely right. I don't disagree with him in the fact that Black women, we really need to get our health together. Like we do. The stats just all around are not in our favor when it comes to obesity. We are the worst, in that area. That's not an area that you want to be the highest in. You know what I'm saying?
That's why we cooking this unseasoned chicken and you better eat it.
So in that regard, that he's absolutely right. Like, when you're focusing on certain things, that when you're talking about family and longevity and things like that, your health should be your priority. So being obese is not okay for us. And even though women are the worst, we are in terms of overall and compared to other race and ethnicities as well as gender. We are the worst, but in general, Black people, Black men and women, when it comes to obesity, both of us are terrible. So we both need to take accountability for that and begin to live a more healthier lifestyle in general. In terms of attitudes, I'm kind of up in the air with that. Do I know Black women with attitudes? Absolutely. And I do think, I don't know what part of it is, what part of it is, if I speak something that's against what you feel, then it's automatically, oh, you must got an attitude. I think it can be misinterpreted sometimes. I think sometimes just regular female behavior across all genders occur, but because you're in most contact with your people, you're going to see those things more often from, your Black counterpart. In my opinion, but I definitely feel, though, that we do need to work better in terms of our delivery when we say things. I know for me, I know I can be off-putting to some people because, like, my upbringing, where I'm from New York. One of the things we are very direct in the way that we speak. So there is no minced words. I'm going to come out and ask you a direct question and expect a direct answer. But to some men, that may be very, not New York. I mean, from my experience, not New York men, because that's just the way that we relate to each other. But being here in the South, I've had to learn how to navigate a different way, which has been very difficult because I'm not the type that knows how to kind of cover my words and speak in emphasis to have you read between the lines. Like, no, I'm going to say it this way because I don't want any room for misinterpretation. But to somebody else, they'll look at it like, oh, there she go with that attitude. Oh, see, Black women don't know how to, and it has nothing to do with that. So I think sometimes
we do have attitude. I don't have
absolutely,
attitude, but Black people do have attitudes.
So I think, to what Mistaken was saying, I think women in general have attitudes. I think Black women are the only ones that get a bad rep for it. Mm-hmm. I think that only recently have white women been called Karens for their attitudes. Latina women have always been considered spicy. You know, it's considered a bit of a thrill when they have an attitude. It's only problematic when that attitude is coming from a Black woman. It's labeled with such negativity as if all women don't carry these traits. And I think it's interesting, mistaken, that you say that your directness is looked at as an attitude when men keep screaming at the top of their lungs, we just wish women would just say
Honest.
it, just be upfront, just say it out, don't sugarcoat it. But then it's demonized as attitude. And I think, you know, everybody needs to sit down at the table and have a really upfront conversation about what is it specifically about when Black women behave in this way. Is it problematic, but it's considered, you know, attractive, or, you know, a little risque when it comes from other races because they display the same behaviors. It's just not characterized the same way.
And I grew up around, honestly, like, again, being in New York, you're growing up with Puerto Ricans and Dominicans. We're all in the same boat in the areas that I lived. And you didn't necessarily see a difference. It just depended on what area you lived in, what your environment was. And you come out of that environment, everybody behaves the same way. So a lot of times when I hear like guys say, oh, I need a Hispanic woman, you know, they're this, they're that. And I'm like, okay, like you're gonna get the same thing. The only thing you're just gonna get cussed out in Spanish. Like it might sound sexier, but I've seen Hispanic women cut into men the same way Black women do, you know? And so in that regard, I do think there's just, I guess, again, when you're around your own culture, you're going to see that mostly, you know, all the time. And then sometimes you kind of fetishize other cultures that are outside of yours because there are some aspects that are different. You know what I mean? Like when you're talking about, oh, Hispanic value family and things like that, everyone that I grew up around, like my family, they valued family, you know? So we had big dinners. We, you know, went to each other's houses on, you know, holidays, and my mom cooked, my aunt cooked, you know, we went to our, you know, uncle's house, our cousin's house, and we all, you know, played. So family was very important to us as well. So I just think it's about what you're exposed to. And a lot of times what you're exposed to becomes your reality. And if you don't step outside of that, you're automatically going to begin to think that all, you know, Black people are like this, or all Black women are like that. And that's not the case.
Why do you think that so many do have an attitude, though? It no matter what race it is. Why do you think that women, you know, because I see it too. They get an attitude with me as well. So why do you think that we have such a, you know, it's just automatically this attitude? Because, you know, you can go somewhere, especially you New Yorkers. I'm sorry, I love New York, but Lord Jesus. You know what? Because to me, it feels like it would just be a much nice, just to be nicer. But you know, there are some people, especially in the environment in which we work, mistaken, we get hit with the attitude, and it's like, I don't even know you, young lady. You know, so why do you think that we do that? Like, you know, where does the attitude come from? What do you think that is?
So no, go ahead, Javara.
Okay. So, in agreement, overall, women do have attitudes, right? We agree that. I will also go as far as to say, I do think Black women have bigger attitudes, or attitudes more often. It's just, you know, and not just because I'm around them more. This is what I see. But I think the reason, it's a bunch of reasons, because we are very complex human beings. Like, first of all, men don't even understand PMS is a real thing, right? Just that alone. And that comes around like on a cycle every month, right? So the mood changes, the blood frequency, your brain activity, like it really, physiology, like it changes. It makes you feel like a different person. It makes your body do different things, your brain. So that's one aspect of it. And then on top of it, if we're being honest, right? There are married women who have attitudes. There's single women who have attitudes. But a lot of the times the attitude is triggered or geared towards or and due to either the man that's in their life or the lack of, right? And that's our hearts and minds and how we deal with different situations, but it's people just aren't happy. People just aren't happy. Happy people don't typically have attitudes, and that maybe the women, single women who are in situations where they're not being fulfilled financially, emotionally. And I don't know why women are unhappy, but I feel like that's the core of having an attitude, lacking something or feeling like you're missing out on something that you wish you had.
I love it. I love it. So before I go into it, Shan Monet, I get that New Yorkers get a bad rep for their attitude, but when we hear a Southern woman say "bless your heart," that's not out of kindness. That is definitely attitude, even though it's gentle. And I think that tone policing has a really big part to do with it, right? Like if you do it softly and gently and ladylike, even though it's an attitude, it's more palatable, I think, to most people. And so, but I think to what Javara was saying, it's true. Women aren't happy, right? And why should they be? Women are so criticized. You're too big, you're too small, your hair looks the wrong way, it doesn't look presentable, you're single, you're married. There's this constant
Judgment.
not just judgment, but like consequences to the judgment too. Like it's almost like no matter what you do, you can never get anything right. And I think that puts women in a situation where they're just constantly on edge. And then you add in dynamics when it comes into the workplace, when it comes to, relationships or lack thereof, romantic wise. Even when we talk about some of the dynamics that happen within friendships, whether it's woman to man or woman to woman, like those can be pretty daunting as well. And so women are constantly criticized and penalized for any decision they make, that it's just hard to just be happy. Because even if you're somebody who somehow manages to block out all of it and run around happy, what do we call? We call them ditzy. We call them airheaded. We call them ignorant.
It's easier to be happy when your needs are being met, right? So I think when you look at the stats, it just across the board, when you look at the poverty rate, Black, people are like, one of the highest poverty rates. When you look at obesity, Black people are at the highest rate of obesity. When you look at education rates, Black people are some of the ones with, like in terms of high school and stuff like that, graduation rates. So there are a lot of social aspects that impact how you respond, right? So if you're always on 10 in like all of these areas, you're at the highest level of being the worst, that is hard. Like when people are like, just relax in your femininity, like, how am I going to relax? Like, I got to go to work. I have to take care of, those who are single moms. I got to take care of my kid by myself. I got to make sure I'm going to work. I'm trying to go to school so I can do better for my family. I have either a baby father that is not, doing what they need to do. I don't have the help. So when you're talking about attitude, it's very difficult to walk around happy when most of your time is trying to figure out how are my needs going to get met,
So I so here's kind of where there's like contention for me in that, right? If that were true, then the women who hit higher on the socioeconomic food chain would show up happy, and yet they're showing up with attitudes as well, right? And so I think there's another dynamic to it as well, right? We see women who are well off, who are having their needs, the majority of their needs met, still showing up with an attitude.
But are they having their needs met? Or are we
Well, and
saying
that's-
because they
But
have?
I'm not saying all, because I think it's I don't think it's personally, I don't think it's possible for anybody to have all of their needs met all of the time, right?
Mhm.
But if we have even like a 70% of your needs being met, and you're still showing up with an attitude similar to the size of someone who's getting maybe 10% of their needs met, there has to be another dynamic to it.
Well, it is, because even though you say, like, even though you are moving up the socioeconomic scale, you're still going to deal with some of the same social ills, because you can move up the highest socioeconomic scale, but healthcare for Black women is still poor. It's better than, the lower, but it's still, when you compare people that are at that same rate, it's still, it still is worse. In terms of, I was reading a study not too long ago that was saying also, like, even though you're at the higher for Black people in general, but Black women even more so, because you're dealing still with the sexism aspect in the workplace, where you're not making the same amount as a guy in that same position with the same qualifications. So you still deal with sexism, and like, just like Black men, they'll still deal with racism regardless of what. So even though you move up the socioeconomic status, you may deal with some of these social ills at a lesser rate, but you're still dealing with them. You're not going to escape it being a person of color. So but
It's harder as a
yeah.
person of color.
And the positive aspect to that, to kind of speak to what you were saying, Inez, is that the stats do show that the higher the income and education level, typically those marriages are reported as being happier overall when compared to those who are at a lower socioeconomic status or education rate. So getting your education and making a higher income can lead to greater happiness.
If you got a partner, because I do feel like the higher, as a single woman, right, the higher your social, I don't know the words I use, right, the higher more money you make, the higher social activity you have, then the lower chance of having a partner who you feel matches where you are. Because as we see, when women get a certain level of degree and a certain income, then they're looking at men differently, because it's like, well, you have to make this amount of money too, and you have to do this, when now it's making that separation, and men who are already in that caliber either already have somebody or not really looking to have just one somebody. So that changes the whole aspect of everything again.
I need to jump in on this, because I hear that talking point a lot. And I know we're not talking about the men tonight, but I think it's important to bring this point up. I hear that so often. And I think this goes to the video that we watched at the beginning about like education and the way some women prop that up. Because if we really take a look at it, there are a whole lot of blue collar workers that make similar amounts of money to these women you're talking about. But because the socio part is not being factored in as heavily as the economic part, now we have a problem, right? So it's not just about the money when it comes to certain women. It's also about the social status that man comes with.
Mm-hmm.
And so,
I would think that the social status is probably more important than the money. Would you guys
absolutely
agree?
Right? Because sometimes when we take a look at some of these white collar jobs that we revere, they're making a lot less money than some of these blue collar workers, right? Like some of these construction workers who own their own construction companies make well into the 6 figures, and some of them even pushing into the 7, but they get overlooked because their jobs are not considered, as flashy as some of these doctors. Like if you're a general practitioner, you might, if you're lucky, depending on your state, make 6 figures, and even then you're on the lower part of it. whereas most blue collar workers, depending on if you have a specialty or not, are out earning you. But it's the social status that comes with being a doctor, no matter what kind of doctor you are, that is more revered.
I agree.
Yeah, but keeping it funky, keeping it real. When we look at the average statistics in general, college educated men and women typically make more than non-educated men and women. And so when we are looking at blue collar workers and things like that, you do have some within some specific area, just like when you have college degrees. Not all college degrees equate to a high earning. You know what I'm saying? There are certain degrees that you just might as well not even waste your money because the return on investment isn't there. So it doesn't even make sense. You know what I mean? And if that can occur at the collegiate level, then the same thing within the blue collar field. There are certain jobs within that field that is not going to make six figures. You know what I mean? It just isn't. And so I also think while the economic, the social status matters, I do believe that, like, I guess I beg to differ a little bit in the fact that the social status matters more than the economic status for women. Because if women is looking for the security aspect, to them, security equates money.
So
And
let me ask you a question. This is
with status.
honest answer.
With money.
So this is an honest answer, because people think that, especially when you're an entry level attorney, you don't make that much money. But so if you got a man who is a plumber and he's making $100,000, just throw it out there, and you have this attorney who's entry level, maybe $70,000, which one do you think the women will date?
If it's a plumber, I believe it depends on how he is presented. So if he's the owner of his own plumbing company, I think that has more of a, like, when you're looking at, like,
that will make, because he's in management at that point, that's more of a white collar situation. That's not
no, it still be considered blue collar. Even if you're still in management, you're still typically blue collar workers are still partaking in the job, even if they're in management. But I would disagree. I would say even if they are in management, most women, again, not all, but most women would pick the lawyer because it sounds better. Because you don't have to sit there and justify, like, oh yeah, okay, he's a plumber, but he owns his own business, because that's an uncomfortable dynamic to be in for the man or the woman. Like, you don't actually respect what he does. You only respect his take home. And if you think that man is not also feeling that this woman has to justify his job every time, I think women are going with the lawyer because it's more socially acceptable. Even if it's entry level, she can, wait it out for him to climb up the social ladder or push him into it, versus having to justify a blue collar worker and how they bring their take home.
So then you're saying financial security because this is what I hear. Like, for me personally, and I know people are going to say that I'm capping, but I'm really not. That money has never been one of my primary things when it comes to dating. It just wasn't. To me, the character of the man was always more important. Just because of certain things that I know for me that I need, and in terms of my needs being met, because in my mind, I can always access money. Like, I'm a hustler, so money is gonna come. So that has never, a man could never use his money as a means to get me. You're gonna have to come with something different. And so, but I do hear a lot of women who say that the financial security is that important to them. And so I'm looking at, if that is the case, then why would a woman choose a lawyer over the entrepreneur who has a plumbing company that's making significantly more money than the lawyer? Like, that doesn't. That
It's
doesn't make sense.
respectability
Sound good.
politics, right?
Sound
I don't think respectability politics has never been a foreign concept to the Black community, right? The way that you present yourself to the outside world holds so much weight. That's why there's so much controversy about hair texture. That's why there's so much controversy about speaking a certain way, even when it comes to education, right? I think as much as financial security is important to women, I think the social status of how that financial security is earned is important, because let's not also pretend like the dope dealers are cool when you're young, right? Because he's buying you all these things and taking you on shopping trips and all of this stuff. But then when you get to a certain age when you're looking to establish your life, their income isn't worth it, because the social status that comes with that has repercussions, right? I think the way that a man earns his income is equally important as how much he brings in to a lot of women. Again, not all, but a lot.
Let me add.
I agree. Oh, go ahead. No, go ahead.
Okay. I just want to say, so I've had this conversation with some friends recently, right? The drug dealer thing, and men who make a certain amount of money, and just kind of looking back, and like even now, obviously the lifestyle is dangerous, not safe, but I do feel like that the likeness that a lot of women had or have towards those guys versus guys who do legal work is the mindset of those guys, though, because a lot of men who went into selling drugs and making money illegally were really doing it because they're about their family, right? They had to take care of their mom, their siblings, and then when they get a woman, get a girl, like their priority is her, versus other guys who make their money regular. Not this is not an all in all case, but guys who don't have that same mindset, like I'm here, I have to take care of my family, otherwise they're not going to make it, we won't survive. Their priority isn't always, or the desire to have a woman right there to kind of keep them level-headed, or so it's kind of just an even different personality style versus not just the way they make their money. But that's a whole nother conversation.
But I think that the big point here, and I'm glad that we have Mistaken and we have the Enos. That the point is there's a woman for every guy. You just have to find what works for you, what's compatible for you. There are women who want the guy who's the hardworking plumber, and there's some women who don't want that. They want the lawyer. You just have to find what fits in your lane. And I think the problem is we too often, kind of like you were saying, Javar, kind of earlier, just in a different context, we often try to match, and they're just not compatible with us. Mm-hmm. Okay, so if you are a plumber, you want to find someone like Mistaken, or if prestige makes a difference, if you're of status, Nas is your girl, Mm-hmm. So it's a woman out here for everybody. Everybody can win if they stay on their game piece, if they stay playing their game within their.
For the record, I'm okay with blue collar workers. Just want to go ahead and put that out there.
You can win. Everybody can win. So let me so I wanted to go through some super chats. I want to thank everybody for super chats real fast. Malevolent Elephant, thank you for that super chat. Oh, thank you. He always shows up. He be in the chat, but he be showing up. I love him. I can't read this.
Okay, Ray Alexander, $10. People tend to date and marry other people within their socioeconomic peer group. Those with similar social standing, job prestige, educational attainment, and economic background, assortative mating. And that is true.
Absolutely.
That's absolutely true. I just want to say, Sean, $9.99, thank you. I just want to say men aren't built that way. Generally, we don't want to read your mind. We are direct. Also, when asked what is stopping you from focusing on your feminine attributes as opposed to education, like I said before, I think it has to do with the way that you word the question. If you're saying what you bring to the table, I think most people interpret that as, their accomplishments, what they have done. But if you're looking for specifically feminine attributes, then I think your questions need to focus on that. Not saying what are your feminine attributes, but more like, do you enjoy cooking? Do you want children? Things like that, that will, address those specific qualities that you're looking for.
Okay, so that was that. Did anybody else want to add to that? No.
Kinda.
Okay, go ahead.
Because when he says like what's stopping you from focusing on it, everything else in life that we have to do, right? So to go to school, to make our own money. Keep in mind, like back in the day when women were just at home being cute, cooking and raising kids, like they didn't have to worry about any other things. Husband come home, give her the check, she pay the bills, and she's able to do what she needs to do at home. So like we're not in that space, right? A lot of us aren't in that space right now to just focus on solely feminine attributes. So I think that's the answer to his
I
question.
want to add something controversial to his question. Some men weaponize feminine attributes. Some men will have a woman cooking and cleaning and playing house and playing stepmommy, and never have any intention of marrying this woman because they're attaining these feminine attributes. And I think that story has repeated itself so many times that women are shying away from focusing on that in conversation because they want to be seen as more equal. They want to be seen as partners and not somebody to exploit.
Great point.
That's the point.
Mm-hmm.
I guess that's that. Yeah.
Okay, so we do have one other. I'm gonna do this super chat real fast. I'm just, if I can find it. I lost it. Oh, but anyway, real fast. I'm gonna find it. But I had some. There were some because we're gonna be wrapping up soon. There were some comments that I wanted to pinpoint that out. I put a star by because I think they're important. So highest divorce rate. Let me just say this because it's gonna go to another question at the very, very bottom when it comes to marriage. What we find is that when women don't date within their socioeconomic class, they do divorce. Most divorce rates happen when a woman dates economically down. When it comes to Black women, most divorces, most people who what studies have shown, both mistaken and I read, when Black women date across or up, those marriages are actually quite successful. It's just when you have an uneven amount of people going to college, a lot of Black women date men who are not in the same economic status as them, class as them. And so that's when the divorce seems to take place. Am I saying it right, Ms.
Yeah, well, the other thing too is that when they're saying highest divorce rates, the highest divorce rates typically occur between those who are less educated. Less educated equals higher divorce rate. So, so when people are talking about like, Black women is crazy because Black women are more likely to get married and divorced than any other group. So that's kind of weird too. The stats that was on the National Center for Family and Marriage, that was one of the things that came out, one of the studies that based on that particular study, that Black women were more likely to get married than anybody else across the group. But at the same time, they also were more likely to get divorced. But if the thing is, trying to look at stats to kind of give you a little edge on whether or not your marriage would work. When men say, well, education doesn't matter to me, I'm like, it should, because based on those stats, marrying somebody without any education increases the likelihood that you're going to get a divorce. So
I think that's interesting because like hypergamy, the practice of marrying up, women have been doing it since the invention of marriage,
but
right?
You're looking more at a modern time, where back then the reason it worked because women didn't have access.
So I get that part,
yeah,
right? But I think where my questions kind of come in is like I understand like the breakdown of the stats in looking at the financial aspect of it or the socioeconomic aspect of it, right? But then when we look at the stats around the reason for divorce, it's typically infidelity, typically lack of communication, mismanagement of finances. Those are typically the top three, right? And so,
but that's the top three. That's not specific to Black women. That's just across, divorce.
right,
Okay.
right. No, I get that part. But Black women also fall within those statistics as
Overall
well,
statistics,
right? And so I can understand if both people aren't educated, then maybe the skill set isn't there to have clear communication, to have proper management of finances, to, understand the consequences of infidelity, or to put things in place that would deter infidelity, right? Typically, when you understand how the larger world works, you're more apt to having those conversations, right? So to some degree, having education gives you exposure to how other people run things or how people have run things in the past, and gives you kind of grounds to introduce those conversations into either the vetting system or into your marriage and relationship. But I think it's strange that even with this modern society, there's still a push for traditionalism. And so there's still, with men still saying your accolades don't matter, they're still upholding the practice of hypergamy, right? Like they're still saying like, hey, like we don't need you to be socioeconomically and equal. We're still willing to do these, like to get married to you, right? And this is the common talking point. Men are saying your education doesn't matter, how much money you bring in doesn't matter, the quote unquote masculine traits don't matter. They're still upholding hypergamy and saying you don't need those things to qualify to be my wife, right?
That's what they're saying, but the research doesn't. That's all I'm saying. The research doesn't support that. Is what I'm trying to say. Research supports, which to me makes sense. When we're talking, a lot of times when we say unequally yoked, it's coming from a religious perspective. That's typically what we hear, when we hear that saying. But to me, unequally yoked is, it doesn't necessarily just have to be religion. I think it matters in education, social class, whatever your belief system is outside of, religion, whatever your core values are, all of those to me falls in line with the being unequally yoked, right? And so even if I am that money doesn't matter to you, right? In dating me or marrying me, my education doesn't matter, how much money I make doesn't matter. But with that also comes with certain, like you said, exposure. So if I come, like I grew up, in a hood, and so that environment is totally different than the environment that I lived in once we moved out of the hood, right? So I think for me, I might be a match for somebody who came from that same situation, because they're going to understand certain nuances, the way that I might respond to certain situations because of my upbringing, because they had the same upbringing growing up in a hood, right? You know what I'm saying? So I think a lot of that has to, like, being equally yoked. So even though my education may not matter, if you're educated, there's just going to be a certain level of understanding that I'm not going to have because I did not experience that. And that could be a source of frustration for some women or some men who's ever in that situation where the other person isn't educated. So the unequally yoked part is very important. So if you don't care about the education or their income, then you better be on the same page when it comes to those core values that you have, because if those are out of whack, that's not going to work either. So it's definitely about exposure in your environment and trying to find the mate that you qualify for.
So this is what gets me right here. Wait for this right here. It says she left out Black women leading in baby mama rates. But I just saw, let me find this other comment because they go hand in hand. Gosh, why didn't I tag
They
it?
are, and Black men are leading in pookie rates.
Look, why marry anyways? A 75% chance in divorce. You do understand if you don't marry, the chance, unless you're just not gonna have kids. It kills me when people are like, oh, it's not good to marry, but then in the same sense, it's like, oh, baby mama rates are high. What, are y'all just not having sex? Like, because if you speak against not getting married, then you're speaking for having kids out of wedlock, because the only way you cannot have kids out of wedlock is if you get married. Right? Unless you just don't want to have kids. It's so crazy to me.
You know, I think that is interesting, and I'm going to speak man language for just a quick second. The chances of becoming a professional athlete are even slimmer than that. And so if you can still aspire to be a professional athlete, marriage should just be a no-brainer at this point. And I agree with you, Shan Monet, like understanding that there's something broken in the way that people are choosing their partners is very different than devaluing marriage altogether, right? Understanding like people are not being taught how to choose a wife or husband properly is a significantly different problem than saying marriage as an institution is outdated and should be like done away with. Because if we're going to talk about the statistics, let's talk about the statistics of how significantly advantaged children are when it comes to a two-parent household. Let's talk about the advantage as a man when it comes to promotions, when it comes to physical health, when it comes to lifespan that marriage actually provides to a man. In fact, if we're actually going to talk about statistics, marriage disadvantages women more than it does anybody else, and they still desire it. So to talk about the fact that marriage should just be done away with because people don't know how to choose somebody properly, I think is a little bit ridiculous.
You're on mute.
I think that going to prison is the only standard to being a pookie. Somebody just said something. I just wanted to point that out to the person in the comments. I'm not going to even bring the comment up because I don't even want to talk about it. But let me go through. And he said most men don't have children. I wish JR, so I could pull up a stat. I'm going to drop,
most men don't have children.
Of these links. Maybe most young men. I know. I would say that young people like this new generation, maybe 20 to 25, 26, possibly. But if we're talking about the older generation, the last stat I saw, and I've looked high and low, and I would definitely drop this stat, says 71% of Black men had at least one child out of wedlock. Even if they were married to another woman, there was at least one child they had out of wedlock. And I would be more than happy to drop that stat.
Well, I guess that's the thing that confuses me a lot of times when men are making this argument about women choosing Pookie and Ray Rays and having out of wedlock, children, which is a fact in terms of having out of wedlock children. But you can't have out of wedlock children without you can't have out of wedlock children as a woman without having a man who's not involved. You understand what I'm saying? Like they try to separate the two or make it seem as if, well, it's the woman that's choosing to be with this man, or it's the woman that's choosing to have these babies with these men who not willing to get married. I'll give you that. Like I can't argue that fact. Yes, women make the choice to bring the child into the world. But
that fact.
Huh?
I said I can argue that fact. I think there's this
unspoken nothing to argue with the fact that women are the ones that birth babies.
I hear you. I hear you that they birthed them, but let's also not pretend that there isn't also a population of men who I think I heard this term earlier, like bookmark women by choosing to impregnate them so that they can stay linked to them or attached to them in some sort of way even though they're not looking for that level of commitment. I don't, that decision is a two-party decision. Like birthing
Yeah.
the child
You're
falls on the
speaking in
mother.
extremes. The likelihood of men trying to trap women with babies is minuscule to the overall of just both parties being irresponsible in not taking precautionary measures to not get pregnant. I mean, and to me, and I know people will disagree with me, like especially men, will say that it's the primary responsibility of the woman to make sure that she doesn't get pregnant if she doesn't want want a baby or what have you. But for me, I just think since it takes two people to have sex, I think it takes two people to protect themselves from having unwanted children. That's just me. Call me, stupid to believe that both parties need to be equally responsible to prevent a pregnancy that neither wants. But I mean, I think that's an extreme. Not to say that it doesn't happen. We know women trap men, but if I was to compare the two, with men trapping women with babies, I would definitely err on the side that you have more women that try to trap men with babies than the other way around.
Sure. I mean, that's kind of hard to prove. So, just gotta try to get to the proof. I did drop the link to the percentage of the last stat I saw on that, and the link. I hope you guys saw it, so you can go back and look at that stat. I did go into the chat and drop it. But let me go on to this other stuff. Okay. Oh, here's one. Highest student loan debt. Listen, if you're gonna spend $50,000 on that car with them big rims, you can spend $50,000 to invest in yourself with a college education.
And the return on investment is a lot higher.
Can you see that, Tara?
Hero apocalypse. Women don't listen to men. That's the problem. Maybe if they listen more and talk less, they can get it right. I
beg to differ. I do think that women listen to men. They just don't listen to some men. I do think that they listen to men.
Well, I think both of us. I think both can be said. I think what happens is like how they say women are for Mars, men are for Venus. I think we both listen to each other, but I think at the same time we both miss the message that the other is trying to convey. I think both of us suffer from that. Like, I hear women all the time say they just don't get it. You know what I'm saying? And I hear men say the same thing, that they just don't get it. And I do believe like dialogue is very important. And asking specific questions, like when I hear something like women don't listen to men, and that's the problem. I don't necessarily think that's the problem. I just think what happens is you specifically have a specific need that is not being met with the women that you're choosing, or vice versa. With women, they have a specific need that's not being met by the men that they're choosing, and then they generalize and say they don't get it. But I think it has a lot to do with the way that you communicate your needs and your wants. And I'm guilty of that. I think, well, I'm gonna say me, but I know a lot of women, a lot of times we do expect men to somewhat read our minds, because they're like, oh, if they know me the way that they should, then they know how I feel. So you don't necessarily say certain things, but you'll walk around with an attitude waiting for him to ask why you got an attitude, instead of just saying, this is what I'm feeling right now, like being direct in those specific things. Like we want men to have that ability to, because they're so in love with us and know who we are, that they know what we're feeling without us even saying anything. And that's not the case.
Listen, because Tara, I know you can go on for 15, 20 minutes. Listen, women, well, that's not the one I'm going to choose. One guy said, because I can't see.
Well, read them on.
Look, you listen to the Caucasian man at work. No, our boss is actually a black man. Being mistaken, actually a black man boss.
Okay.
So
we have black male.
I want to address that because, like, I'm so sick of that talking point. I am so sick of it. So do you, sir. but you don't listen to your woman when you get home, right? Like, let's not pretend that is not a two-way street, right? Understanding, like, taking orders for a paycheck is different than building a partnership. The nature of the dynamic is different. And so let's not compare apples to oranges.
Mhm.
And let me just say this, and with the big rims, maybe I shouldn't have said big rims, because you lose it out of context. If you go and buy a $50,000 car, period, instead of getting an education, a car depreciates. I don't care that your education can only make you better. So there's that, because they're stuck on the rims. Okay, maybe they don't ride around rims anymore. I don't know, but you buy $50,000 cars to sport them around, right? So it's the same thing. Super chat, sorry.
Rebellious videos, $2. Attitude tier list: Black, Puerto Rican, Italian.
All right. Thank you for the super chat. Baby mama rates. Again, we've already stated that. If you're not, if only 48% of Black men are marrying and 52% of Black women, what's going to happen? You're going to have babies out of wedlock. So until we start preaching marriage, it's just going to keep on happening.
Mm-hmm.
It just is.
Well, and I would go as far as not just preaching marriage, but also preaching how to stay married, because some of those stats of single motherhood is not necessarily only the stats that have to do with people having babies out of wedlock. It's also those people who have gotten married and have gotten divorced as well, and now are single parents. So
no, the question was, it's kids out of wedlock. It's not single parents. The rate of wedlock.
Yeah, but when they're saying single parent rates, when the stats are saying single parent rates, it includes those who are not married. So even if you're divorced, you're still counted in those stats because you are no longer married. So I think the goal, especially too, when we look at our stats as Black people overall, you have women have the highest divorce rates, and we have highest rates of being single, parents. And so I think when we're preaching about making sure that you're not having kids before you get married, the goal should be marriage. But at the same time, that same conversation also needs to incorporate what it takes to stay married.
You know what's so funny? This comment right here: baby mamas are different from single mothers. I would even go to say that single women who are educated are different mothers than women who are not. If we're talking about education, I would say an educated woman who is single with a kid raises her child a lot different than a woman who is uneducated who is single with a child.
So I don't disagree with you. I think that's just a dangerous talking point, right? And this is why. I think for the women that can still do it without an education, they get lumped in with the women who are mishandling situations, right? At the same time, there are women who are educated who have no emotional regulation that just like really mishandle being a single mother, right? When we take a look at women who keep the father away from their children, we look at women who intentionally weaponize like child support laws, when we take a look at some of the ways that manipulative women move, I think when it comes to raising a child, I think it's different. But
when we speak of that, obviously it's not all, but most of the time when I hear people speak, especially the men speak, they're talking about, that they broke the family up because of welfare. Women would, you can't get welfare if you're getting paid. You know what I'm saying? So the arguments that some of the guys bring up to the forefront, they seem to be talking about, playing, using the system to leave the relationship.
But even that talking point doesn't really make sense, because if you really start to do your Googles and your research on, what that stuff actually looks like, you actually it's not an advantage. In fact, it is a heavy disadvantage. And so anybody that comes that I've had discussions with that has brought that up. Like, you are pushing an agenda.
What do you
You are
mean?
not bringing up actual
The narrative, yeah.
yeah.
So what I'm saying to you is that a lot of the things, the talking points that are on, have you not heard the talking point? Like, oh, she's leaving because the government, they're subsidized, there's subsidies. They're
But
things.
but that's exactly what I'm saying, right? Like, those subsidies, have you looked at those numbers? It
Exactly.
doesn't make sense for her to leave because those numbers are significantly less, even if you're bringing in like like an insignificant amount. Like, even if you're not a high earner, right? It's still more than what she would get from the government, right? And still staying together would still advantage those children and their future. Like,
Well, no. I'm not saying,
but
obviously,
I hear
your
you.
household is gonna be the top notch. I don't.
Right. But what I'm saying is, like, when they say these things about women are doing it for welfare, women are doing it for these
They're
government
incentivized
benefits,
to leave.
it's incorrect, because that money is so insignificant. It is not enough to actually raise a child. It's not. It really isn't. And so that talking point is moot to me. And like, it shows that that person isn't well versed in what they're talking about, because that money doesn't make ends meet. You can't actually raise a child on the income that you're getting from government benefits.
And it depends on, like, when people are talking about welfare, the thing is that they don't recognize that there are like 3 different areas within welfare. And for Black women, out of those things that like encompasses like WIC, or food stamps, or housing vouchers, or all of those things, like majority of those who are on welfare are working class. Like, they're working, they just not making enough money to make ends meet. And all of those other areas, that the 3 areas that make up welfare, Black people, the most that they end up, in terms of stats, the part that they use is typically for food. All of those other areas, there are Hispanic and whites that are using the welfare system in that regard, that are benefiting. So when they're talking about, like, what you were saying, like, oh, they're incentivized to leave. When I looked up the stats on that, like you said, most women, when they leave a marriage and divorce, financially, they are ended up doing worse off financially than they were, than their counterparts. And being able to rebuild, the men are typically able to rebuild faster after a divorce than a woman. And that,
so you're saying, so my question was, and this is just for debate, just debating purpose. So you're saying a woman with an education leaves a situation, and a woman who does not have an education leaves a situation to raise a kid, that they're the same.
well, it depends on, in terms of, so if they're equally yoked, like I said, their results are still going to be the same. In terms of, if they're already in like poverty, low socioeconomic status, they end up getting a divorce, that woman is definitely going to fare worse once she gets the divorce, because she's already in poverty. It just sinks her further into poverty. Whereas you may have an educated woman who is making more money, but again, she's married to her counterpart who is also at the same, education level or socioeconomic status within that, that range, that the lifestyle that they made together, once they divorce,
obviously it won't be the same, but
that's my point, is that typically the rebound for her is still going to be much harder than it is for the man once they divorce. That's what the stats say, that typically the divorce.
That's not the argument. Of course, we're talking about the situation as being a baby mom, like when you're in a situation with a single kid, with a kid.
Right. So I get it, right? Like, it goes back to what I was saying earlier, that an education opens more opportunities more readily than not having education. So is it easier for a woman who has education to bounce back? To some degree, yes, right? And I say to some degree because if you have in that time decided to be a stay-at-home mother, that time gap in your resume is going to be like the challenge to find opportunity is going to be almost at par with somebody who doesn't have that education system. Employers look at time gaps in your resume so critically that it becomes really challenging. Now, if you've maintained some sort of work throughout the time of raising your children and now you're divorced and you can there's something to fill in that gap, even if it was part-time or a passion project or community work, 100%. But if you were a full stay-at-home mother in the time that you were married, have not worked, have nothing to show for it, I think it is just as challenging as if you don't have education.
That's not what the stats say.
I don't agree with that. But
That's not what the stats say.
Because in that case, then I would agree with the man. Why go get an education?
Mhm.
It's a waste of time. If it doesn't give you a leverage, then why get it?
Now, I do think what education does provide you as a female in that situation is access to more resources. You've learned where the resources are, you know the ins and outs in terms of trying to access those resources so you can do better. Whereas I do think that those who are in lower socioeconomic status, they are not privy to the same information in terms of access to resources. So I think that does make it a little more difficult.
I didn't say money. I just said education.
I didn't either. I said resources.
Right. So you just pointed out that they are privy to resources, so that gives them a leg up, right?
Right. No, I'm agreeing with you.
Okay.
I'm agreeing with you on that regard. But what I'm saying is when we're comparing just in general what happens during a divorce and how that impacts women.
I never said a divorce though. I said a single mom. Some single moms aren't divorced. It's just a single mom. Well, obviously we want them to be in a marriage, but we're just talking about a woman who has a child, who has a kid. Not divorce.
Gotcha.
Okay, got it. So then what I was saying doesn't count, right? Because for whatever reason, I was assuming.
That's why I said baby mama. He said baby mama versus a single mom.
No, then absolutely. And I agree with Mistaken. Like when you have a certain level of education, you have access to certain people, you understand what the resources are, where to find them, what to do to get them. The level of just understanding of what's accessible to you and how it works and to manipulate it to work to your benefit is definitely an advantage to women who are educated. Women who are not, they're just not in the know and have to rely on word of mouth, which is obviously not always reliable.
Oh shoot, it's 11:30.
It is. So we're gonna be wrapping this
up.
At the end of the conversation, I just want everybody to go where they're appreciated. The solution is go where you are appreciated. Whatever you're in life, just go to that person you appreciate. Everybody's not gonna appreciate you. They're just not. Go to the person who appreciates you fully and loves on you and tells you how handsome and how beautiful you are. That's where you need to go. Because it's all about love, y'all.
I want to take it a step further. Unpack what you appreciate. Like figure out where that comes from. Who taught you what to love and appreciate? And decide if you want to pick that for yourself or not. Because I think there's too many external factors and people playing pretend. So choose it for yourself.
And I guess my word is develop, not just develop the education, but develop your character. Because I think that goes a much longer way than your wallet in dealing with relationships and trying to maintain a marriage. Is character development is so important.
Yeah. Okay, you guys. Well, it's Monday night. Tomorrow's Tuesday. We're still at the end of the week. We got a long way to go. Sorry to disappoint you. Anyhow, thank you guys for tuning in with us tonight. We love you. No matter we disagree with you or not, if you disagree with us, you showed up for us tonight, and we do appreciate that. Have a safe, great week, everybody. Good night.
Good night.